First home buyers face a lot of decisions, one of which is whether to buy new or established property. Today we deep dive into the good, the bad and the ugly with our special guest Cate Bakos, who has written the ultimate guide to the risks of buying brand new or off-plan.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about buying brand new or off the plan properties. But before we get into that, there's a special house, well, not really a special house, a special suburb by the looks of it, behind Meighan in the video. Do tell, what the hell is that, Meighan?
For those who watch, we talk about one of the things of, one of the risks being that there is more and more supply that can come on of a similar thing, often in these areas that are being developed. And I just want to show you, this is an area north of Brisbane. And what you can see there is the established area that has been established over the last 20 years is over here. If you can see my hand moving, then there's a new area being sold here. And looks what's being developed here, even more. So that's actually going to bring more supply on. We'll talk about that and why that's a bit of a risk.
Oh, an aerial map. So if anyone is actually not watching, you're trying to visualize what the hell Meighan's talking about. We're talking about an aerial map that you can see a housing development. And you can see more housing development coming, which is a warning for anyone. Anyway, thank you, Cate Bakos, who has joined us for this episode. She's our guest expert. I guess, do we need to explain who you are, Cate? We do.
Yes, we do. Because our long-time listeners will know you from episode 17. You opened our eyes to the opportunities in Ballarat and Bendigo. But please tell us more about you.
Well, I'm a buyer's agent as well, and we enjoy catching up and talking all things what's going on nationally. I'm down in Victoria. And I cover the Victorian market, so I enjoy the regions, but I also enjoy Metro. And it was a lovely invitation to come back on the show today to talk about something that's dear to me and not for good reason. It's actually because I'm a little bit fearful about some of the risks that people go into without actually knowing. So it's not to say that new or off the plan is all bad, but there are some negatives and we need to talk about them.
I think you're right. And I think you're a bit modest, Cate, because you're also on the board of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. You are a multiple winner of many Buyers Agents Awards. You are the past president of the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia. We could go on and on and on.
Thank you.
Now, I will do your bio for you next time.
And I'm going to add something in too, because a lot of our listeners also listen to your podcast, which is the Property Trio. So there you go. Here we are. We're all amongst friends here, and we share a passion for educating home buyers and also particularly first home buyers in this instance, because this is the riskiest segment of the market, isn't it? And it's one of the segments that are, first home buyers are really pitched at buying off the plan and also brand new house and land packages, more so than probably any other group other than investors. And investors I'm less sympathetic for, because at the end of the day, you're meant to be, doing all your research. But first home buyer, you've never done this before. So we want to make sure that you are protected.
Yeah, great. And so well said. And first home buyers fall prey to this kind of stuff for a lot of reasons. there are some really slick salespeople out there selling brand new.
Right.
It's not your average real estate agent, your local person that's got a new listing. It's people that are getting paid significantly higher commission to sell something off what we call a stock list. And so you can be, lamb to the slaughter without even knowing it if someone's recommending something that isn't a good fit for you.
Yeah. Tell me, Cate, let's get to the heart of it. What's off plan? Let's just really explain it to everybody, because it's a bit different to brand new and finished.
Yeah, there is a difference. Off the plan, people assume that it means an unfinished property, but it actually means an untitled property. So if we take a subdivision, whether it's a big field that a farmer owned and it's all house and land subdivision, or if we just take a really generous block that's been chopped up into little units, or if we take a block of apartments that were built years and years ago under what we call company share, and they're being subdivided into a strata scheme now, all of those things mean that the properties haven't yet been titled. So they're technically off the plan. Now, most off the plan stories that we hear about are brand new or non-existent properties, or half built, or maybe the slab's down or it's up to framing, whatever the situation. But the reality is that there are old established properties that can be subject to being purchased off the plan as well, if their title arrangement is being changed many years later. So off the plan is actually all about a property being titled. It's not necessarily just about it being built.
Quite interesting. And so when you're buying off the plan, how would you describe it? I would describe it as effectively committing yourself and giving yourself the right to purchase that property when it's finished and when it is titled. But there's a lot of risks associated with that, of course. Is that how you would define it, or would you define it sort of more expansively?
Well, you described something that I call an option agreement, Veronica. So if only you could half commit to something, I've got dibs on this, and when it's finished, if I still love it, I'll then pay you the money. That would be awesome. That's an option. That's not how it works. You're actually buying it. Right. So it might be no construction started, and you could be looking at a diorama in a sales office, or some really sleek magazines, or a room that's been set up somewhere else that is mimicking what you can expect to get. And that's a lot of what we see with off-the-plan sales activity. And the problem is you commit to that and you'll be told a date that this project is likely to finish, and that there's 3 different dates when it comes to off-the-plan that haven't been built yet. The first one is the date of completion that they're estimating. The next one is your actual settlement date. And then the following one is the sunset date. And they can all be different. And sunset can be quite scary for you if it comes up before the building is finished and your actual settlement date strikes. And the reason for that is a sunset clause means that the builder or developer have the opportunity to walk away from the contract. Now, if it's really lucrative, so if the local area has done really well and the land growth has been phenomenal, you can expect that you might have made a profit on that property, even though, as we'll get to in the next few segments of this, a lot of these are overpriced to start with. Yeah. But even if you did pay an inflated price, if the area does really well, and if you're hanging around waiting for 3 years for this to be built, and then by the time your settlement date is approaching, it's worth a lot more than you paid. If that sunset date comes up earlier, the builder can let you out of the contract and then sell it to someone for a higher price. And we see that happening. Sometimes you see bad builder behaviour where they will prolong the construction phase so that they can meet that sunset date and get rid of the buyers that were by their side and had committed from day one, let them go, give them their tiny, tiny deposit back, and then sell it for more money to someone else.
Now, there are some states where that's been outlawed now. So as with everything we talk about in this podcast, you have to be very, very aware that the rules are different in every jurisdiction. So just be aware of that. But, that is one huge risk, and it certainly was a bigger risk in every state, I think, originally. Yep. There's also, the fact that so much time goes past, that's assuming that prices have risen in that time. If they don't, you can be sure as hell, you can be sure that that developer is not going to want to get out of that contract.
No. Yeah, and I just want to pick up on your point, Cate, about that sunset clause risk. And that is, if they invoke that clause, so they've delayed construction, either it's been delayed or they've delayed it, and settlement date or the sunset clause comes into action, if the prices of other properties that you haven't bought during that period have gone up, then you may have priced yourself out of the market by being committed to something that you can no longer purchase. So there's a lot of risk in a rising market. There's a lot of potential upswing that you might get if you settle and it's as expected and there's no issues. But there's also that risk that you could have priced yourself out of the market if you end up with no property at the end of it.
I share that view, and I think lack of visibility is the scariest thing. The fact that we're talking about long timelines, not all the time, but often, to have a huge construction completed within 2 years is a really significant feat.
Yeah.
And they can span past 3 years. And I've seen developers accept that the tenure of the settlement period could be as long as 3.5 years. So it's not like the developers don't anticipate it's a big project. But here's the thing, what else could change? So the market might drift backwards. And so it means that you're having to settle a property that's worth less than what you paid for it. You can be very confident that the bank will be aware of that as well. And there's a word for that, a terminology called underwater. It means you've got negative equity. So it means that you're committed to a price tag that's higher than the value of the asset that you're about to settle. That's scary. And it might mean that if you can't manage to bridge that differential, let's say it's drifted back $50,000 in value, the bank says, we're still happy to finance it, but only up to this amount. All of a sudden you've got to find 50 grand. That's scary. What happens if something happens to the buyer's situation in that 2.5 or 3 year wait? Let's say they lose their job, they want to get married and buy a house with someone now, they don't want the unit anymore. Let's say the situation changes.
Move to another place. We had a question on our forum, Veronica, that was, I'd committed to this build and now I've been moved from Victoria to Western Australia. How am I going to get out of it? So there's circumstances that can change from a person's point of view as well as the market.
I wouldn't want to be someone that committed to an off the plan, overpriced property 2 and a bit years ago, because borrowing capacity was very different 2.5 years ago. So interest rate movement can catch you out as well. So my point is that there's a lot of uncertainty in that really long settlement phase. When you buy an established property, you're hoping that your circumstances don't change for the worse between signing that contract and settling that purchase. But the chances of a curveball coming along in a 2 or 3 year period is far, far greater.
Yeah, because settlement is usually anywhere from 30 days to maybe 60 days, depending on what you've negotiated in the contract. So the chances of your circumstances changing, as you say, are much less than if it's a 2 or 3 year period.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about why so many first home buyers purchase off the plan and why they're enticed. And there are a couple of key reasons. The first one is that the marketing is often really slick and those dioramas or pictures look fantastic.
They are amazing. We get delivered this sort of stuff all the time to our office. Goes into one place, and that's a rather large
round file.
Yep. But it is really, really impressive. The marketing material is phenomenal.
Absolutely. And the other one, which is really unfortunate, is you can commit to something with a very, very tiny deposit. Or, as little as $1,000 or a long-term deposit bond, which costs you hundreds of dollars.
That feels less risky, doesn't it? It feels like there's less risk when you put less money on the table. But let's go back to your scenario earlier, because I want to talk about how little that risk actually is the full risk. It's not just $1,000. If you can't settle that property that potentially has that negative equity that you mentioned, and you can't find that money to top up to complete the purchase and settle the property, it's not just $1,000 that you lose, is it, Kate?
No, it's not. So your $1,000 is a holding deposit. And then you're committed usually to a regular deposit. And that could be 10%. You might negotiate 5%, but 5% of $500,000 is still a lot of money for a first home buyer. That can really set you back.
Yeah, and it's not in your account earning interest anymore. It's in their account funding the build.
Yes, and unlike other countries where you can hand your keys in and walk away from your obligation, you can't do that in Australia.
Well,
you're committed.
So what happens when people can't settle on a property they've committed to, some years earlier, is a worst case scenario, they can get sued for the balance of that 10% plus any difference between what that property subsequently sells for versus what they committed to paying for it. So if it sells for less, then you're up to compensate the developer. But beyond that, you know, I've heard stories where I've heard developers say this to me, we don't really want to sue anybody. We'd really rather them buy something else in the complex. So I'll come to them with a get out of jail free card, which might be, okay, you were going to buy the north facing 2-bedroom unit. Now I'll give you the south facing 1-bedroom unit on the corner of the main road, the one that we can't sell. And as your get out of jail free card, you can afford to buy that one. And you're left with from the best apartment in the block to the worst apartment in the block. I mean, those sorts of scenarios do happen. And sometimes buyers see it as a lifeline because they think, at least I don't lose my deposit. But you're losing in terms of potential for capital growth, in terms of the actual property itself doesn't suit your needs. There's a whole range of ways you can lose. So you're sort of trapped, and that's something we definitely don't want people to be.
Not at all. I think the best case scenario for a horror story like that is what we call an on-sell, where the developer finds a salesperson in their team to conveniently find a new buyer who's happy to purchase it off you. There's no guarantee that they'll pay the same price that you paid though. So sometimes you do lose money on that transaction, but that can release you from the contract. And typically I haven't seen very many successful attempts to get out of the contract scot-free when someone has signed one of these things.
Now you talked, just started touching on why so many first home buyers like off the plan or brand new. There's some other reasons as well, and they're largely sort of around the incentives and the grants and stamp duty concessions that are being offered in different states. And it's something that irks me that's what they're aimed at. But that is really attractive to a buyer to say, I could potentially get another $30,000 free money. Why wouldn't I take advantage of it?
Yeah, very true, Meighan. It's a bit scary because I feel like these incentives are created by politicians who don't necessarily understand that they're pointing the neediest people into something that's higher risk. And we should probably talk about why they're higher risk in terms of their performance. We've talked about the risk of the contract, but we haven't talked about the risk of underperformance and the fact that there's a much higher chance technically, scientifically, for a property like this to underperform than for an established property.
Now, I just want to add in there too, you can buy house and land under off the plan as well. You can buy a block of land in a subdivision that has not actually gone to the land titles office. And I've heard horror stories from people that have bought blocks of land that've been sitting there years later, waiting for the subdivision to go through before they can actually get on with their life. They think they've committed to getting a home, and years down the track, they're still sitting there committed to this property, watching prices go up and knowing that they're stuck there. So that's something that I think a lot of people don't realise it, because you think, why do you have to wait for land to be subdivided? It's already there, they've got to put services in to these subdivisions. But so that's something that can happen as well. And so, we might use off the plan. We're sort of interchanging it with anything that hasn't been completed effectively.
Yes, that's right. Or hasn't titled and isn't ready for settlement yet. Now, the problem with purchasing land off the plan and house and land package issue is the land can title and then you settle your purchase and you're sitting on a block of land. So you've still got somewhere that you're paying to live, whether you own another property or you're renting or you're paying board to your parents, but you can't construct yet because you might be waiting on your builder. So there are risks that need to be weighed up in terms of that time frame and what you're on the hook for with your mortgage.
Yeah, and a lot to think about. Now, let's go back to those risks because we talked about overpriced. There's a lot that goes, there's some things that some first-time buyers might not know about that goes into how a brand new or an off-the-plan property is priced. And it can be a little alarming when it becomes known.
If you go shopping for an established property and you just walk along to an open for inspection and meet a friendly agent, they're probably getting, it does vary from state to state and territory to territory, but they're probably getting paid a sales commission. The agency is getting paid a sales commission somewhere between 1.6 and maybe 2.2. So
percent.
Percent. So if you're paying $1 million, that $20,000 is going to the agency, and the agent that sells it to you gets a proportion of that. So what that technically means is you're paying $1 million for a property that might be worth, $980,000 if you're cutting out the sales commission, although most properties transact through agents, so it normalizes. But when you purchase something brand new off the plan through what we call a marketer or an introducer, not a traditional real estate agent with a franchise, they could be getting anywhere up to 6%. I've even heard of more, but 5%, 6% is not unheard of. And there's also developer builder margin. Everybody's making a bit of money along the way. And as soon as you've purchased that product, the issue that you've got, it's like driving a car out of the lot. As soon as you turn the key and drive it out of the lot, it's not worth its brand new price tag anymore because it's started to depreciate. It's not brand new anymore. So the same can be said when you're looking at any property. You've got to divide up the value of the land that it sits on and the value of the dwelling. And with a high-rise apartment, it's a little more tricky because you're apportioning land to each owner. So let's say there's 400 in the building and it's a very valuable piece of land. Let's say it's a $40 million site. Then you can do the maths and work out that each and every owner, if all things are the same, has a piece of land that's worth $100,000 that they don't wholly own, obviously. That's what's divided. So if you're paying $500,000 or $600,000, or if I'm in Sydney, probably heaps more, then your dwelling is worth a lot more than your land content is. And it's land that grows, not dwelling. You've got to get a really gorgeous old period house that has incredible appeal for that dwelling not to be deteriorating in value. We're looking at a brand new off the plan, it's deteriorating. So if the rate of depreciation is higher than the rate of appreciation of the land, then you've got an asset that's going to go backwards for a couple of years.
Yep. I think that's very well explained. Actually, it's probably one of the best wrap-ups that I've heard of, not just the depreciating part of the asset, but it's actually understanding that last bit that you said, and I'd love you to say it again because I think that really nails it and is so simplistic. So if the value of the land
is appreciating, but the value of the dwelling is depreciating at a faster rate, and if it's representing a bigger component of the price that you've paid, then your asset will be going backwards. And there's a
take that on board, everybody.
If you look up land to asset ratio, there's a bit of information on that, and it's never a perfect science unless you get a quantity surveyor. Yeah, because all buildings start to depreciate and they have a depreciable lifespan. The ATO has a lot of information on this, but the reality is if it's brand new, it's worth the most it will ever be worth on the day that you purchase it brand new. And from there, the building value starts to decline. Now, if the building value represents more than half of the total purchase price you've paid, it's a red flag for me. I like a land to asset ratio to be closer to 80%. Now, 100% sounds amazing and you'll get great capital growth, but your house will be an absolute dump and worth zero. So that's not good either. There is a sweet spot and it depends on where your comfort zone is, but the sweet spot's probably somewhere between 60 and 85.
Certainly from an investment point of view, we're certainly on board with that. Veronica, one of the things that we teach people, and we've got a free course that people can do, which is how to price a property, is to help people to understand a comparable sales methodology that's used to arrive at what a property is worth in the current market. Now, one of the things that's really hard with off-the-plan sales, particularly in an apartment complex or even in a big subdivision, is there's a real lack of visibility into other recent sales. And that can be really difficult because sometimes I've heard this, and I know that we all know what goes on. Sometimes even there might be a sale, and I'm using my fingers as inverted commas and rabbit's ears. There might be a sale to set a price for a complex that is actually an internal sale almost, like a developer to their friend, or to set a price that they can then refer to as, well, this one has sold for X dollars. And, what you're looking at is better.
Yes, I've seen that happen.
So have I.
The builder might pay a huge price tag at the start and retain it. So money's not transacting. Obviously, there's a stamp duty component. Yeah, different states and territories again. But back in the day, you could pay very minimal stamp duty on something that had super limited land value, and you'd pay your stamp duty based on the value of the property on the day of the sale. So the day you sign the contract, while it's just dirt, and you're getting a teeny tiny box in the sky, well, your dirt's not going to be worth very much. So your stamp duty will probably be a couple of $100. Easy. You can sign a contract, and that then shows up as a genuine sale, and it can set the benchmark for all of the other sales in the building. And it's not
it's
a nice
artificial.
Way. It is completely.
It's a very artificial and certainly not comparable sale, but it is used as a marketing technique to set a benchmark or set a precedent for and get you thinking, well, this must be worth that because somebody else has paid it.
Someone paid it.
I'll give you an example of how that happened. Some years back, there was this apartment building in Bondi Beach, Sydney, iconic, famous, world famous. And the developer did a transaction of the sub-penthouse, I think it was, with an auntie, so a family member. And it hit the papers at the time, it hit the news as being a record dollar per square metre sale price in Bondi.
I remember this.
So they went there with media. They actually went out with PR on the strength of this related party transaction. And a little while later, one of the people that had bought into the building, very successful person who was a CEO of a very large publicly listed company, came to us and had bought one of the properties in there. I wanted to buy the one next door, knock a hole in the wall and turn it into one big apartment. And he came to us to evaluate it and wanted to know what he should pay. And when we did this research, we realised that he had based the price that he paid for his apartment on this false dollar per square metre amount, which was totally fabricated because it was not an arm's length transaction.
It's a related sale.
The related transaction that they then got PR for, that he acted on himself. He obviously had more money than still more dollars and cents. And he was about to do it again on the confident that he paid market value. He was about to do it again, but he'd hired us. And we went, hate to tell you this, but you've overpaid for yours. And if you go and buy that one, you're just adding insult to injury. And they didn't go ahead and buy it. But when we discovered where that price was set and how it was set, we were mortified at how easy it was to find out, but how easy it was for them to do that, to set the price.
Oh, wow.
Mortifying.
Yeah. So that often sets the benchmark, or is a way to set a benchmark in a complex. But the other thing where there's a lack of visibility, and it concerns me greatly, is where there's rebates. So you might see a sale price of, let's call it $620,000. To get that sale price, the seller, the developer, the marketer, whoever it was, may have given a rebate to that buyer of, it could be, in the vicinity of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, which actually makes that property only worth, the price they paid minus the rebate there is nowhere that's actually noted. So the only thing you'll see is the actual contracted price, not the rebated price.
Yeah.
And that is an artificial sale as well. It's a real sale. I shouldn't say an artificial sale. It's an artificial price.
It is.
But
it goes through the land titles office. That actually goes into the NAPI data. It goes into, all that data is actually the pre-rebate price.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's why valuers, when they look at comparable sales, will very, 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 very rarely use a new sale.
Yeah.
Because there's just too much chance that there's something not quite right about it.
Yeah, it's really hard to grapple with. And for the uninitiated, or for someone who hasn't seen what we're privy to, because we pay for CoreLogic data or Price Finder or whatever, we can see all of the sales, even some of the withheld ones, because we're paying for that information and we're using it commercially for our own analysis. And when you look at one of these new buildings, even when they've sold all of their apartments, very hard to find. It's one of the world's greatest kept secrets.
Yes. True. Yeah. Now, you talked earlier about delays to completion and the sunset clause, so we've touched on that. But what are the things that can happen when you've contracted to buy something that doesn't exist, so off the plan in this case, is that you can have variations to what you expected to get. What ends up being built, even though you might have a floor plan, you might have a schedule of finishes, you might have the colour scheme, the tiles, everything might be in the contract.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff in the contract that actually allows there to be variations to that.
That's right. And contracts vary depending on how sophisticated and protective the solicitors are of their vendor.
Yeah.
But I've seen variations of up to 5% interwoven into the terms and conditions of the contract. Now, 5% less floor area can mean that your balcony is half size, or that you're missing a significant portion of a bedroom or a bathroom, and all of a sudden what you thought was attractive, it starts to have flies on it. Yeah. Variations can also mean that the Miele or Guggenau or any of those very cool appliances that you thought you were getting, Westinghouse or something else.
Down.
And that can be really distressing for buyers when they spot all of this at the final inspection, which, lasts for 10 minutes and you don't get much of a chance to check out any defects. That can be distressing when they realise they've not got what they signed up for. And I remember a little while ago, in between our COVID lockdowns, we had a lovely client contact us from overseas saying, I can't get back to Australia to do my final inspection for the apartment I've purchased. It is brand new. It is off the plan. I've listened to your stuff. I know you don't like them, but could you do my final for me? And I took a defecting specialist with me and said, I will do your final. I'll charge you a little bit more because I'm pulling someone over to the site with me who knows what she's doing. And she came in with her blue tape and her little mirrors and everything, did a great job. We measured up things with the laser measure. Our client was devoed. It was quite different to what she'd signed up for, and it was such an eye-opener for me because you read about it, but then you see the glossy brochures and the floor plans. I looked through her contract. Wasn't same.
Wow. So was it significantly different for her to get out of it?
No, not at all. It was within the tolerances,
within the contract?
but the little things that she liked about it were unravelled. So, for example, a pillar is a little bit more encroaching than what you're expecting it to be. So your balcony view is not the same. Your balcony's not as deep. All of those things that I've just run through, she was really excited about her apartment matching what she thought she'd paid for. And it was interesting because what they'd managed to do was squish the development a little bit to pop in a few extra units. So between,
wow.
Yes, these things can happen.
Goodness. God. So that's a real surprise because if you're measuring up a bedroom on a plan and you think I can fit a king size bed in there and 2 bedside tables and a chest of drawers and then there's that 5% variation that's allowed for in the contract. And
usually it's a little less, but I mean 5% significant. But I've certainly seen 3% being a bit stock standard.
Yeah. And you can no longer fit that king size bed in that bedroom because the width of it is no longer the same, or they've put as you say, a pillar has been put in with extra support because the engineers need it, or the window isn't in the same position as you're expected. So there's actually no wall to put your bedroom on. These can have a big impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. A regrettable decision.
Yeah. And when you're buying strata, of course, when you're buying an existing property, you can actually see what the current levies are. You can see the current situation of the building, the financial position, their sinking fund forecasts or capital works fund forecasts, et cetera. But when you're buying brand new, none of that exists, does it? You've got an estimate of what the strata levies will be.
Yeah.
I mean, what's involved
you might
in
not
that?
even have a strata manager or a building manager appointed yet. And so it's important for buyers to remember that they are the strata group. They are the owners corporation or the body corporate. People always say to me, the body corporate did this, that and the other. And I say, no, you are the body corporate. You've got to speak up. So if you get all of these new owners and the block settles and you have your, welcome to the new building party and everyone says, oh, look, we don't really want to manage the garden out there, we just, we got the guys downstairs can do it, or, I know this guy down the road, whatever. They set the scene for all of the things that are seen to in the building. And if you get a bunch of people saying, no, I'm a busy professional, I want a pool guy to come and clean the pool every week, I want a gardener there every week, we'd really like someone on concierge on the desk downstairs to make sure there's no riffraff, all of a sudden your OC fees have skyrocketed. And no one can predict that until the owners corporation is established and the owners speak up.
Yeah, yes. Some of the buildings actually, and again, I've not had a lot to do with our plan, but some of the buildings, I think the developer sometimes maintains the body corporate for a period of time and is the appointed on-site manager, so that they can control some of those elements of defects and repairs during a specific period of time. I've certainly heard of that. Have you seen much of that?
Very much so. And look, some buildings are so well run. I've met awesome building managers. There's no doubt about it. Not every high rise is a bad thing. But the lack of visibility and the lack of guarantee of a cap on the owner's corporation fees is my issue. If you're sensitive to cash flow, you need to think really hard about taking that risk.
Well, there's also something that, again, with the lack of transparency in cases, sometimes there are contracts that the developers entered into with certain providers. It might be insurance providers, or it might be building maintenance providers, or it might be a building management firm that they've entered into to get favourable rates, on the services that these companies have offered them. But they pass the obligation on to the owner's corporation or the board of corporate of the new building. And that owner's corporation is actually saddled with that for, sometimes decades, but, often not uncommon to go for 10-year contract. That has been, negotiated to those people and committed to those people. So, you can inherit these things in certain areas. I know that there are some states where that's actually being outlawed also. That's something that's being addressed. But these are all risks of things that have been decided for you effectively, but you've got no say in it, and you're obliged to continue with them. And also there's times when the developer would retain ownership in the building, and sometimes that's great. They're there to make sure that the building is looked after and kept in peak condition, and any defects are addressed. And sometimes it's actually so that they can have a majority so that nothing gets done. So, and they won't be held accountable, and then they start selling everything off after a period of time before it all sorts of starts falling apart. But after that time, the statutory period has passed. So, and it's hard to know for the newbie, how do you work out whether I've got one of those buildings or one of those buildings, because
very hard.
You get a good one, fantastic. You get a bad one, it's a nightmare.
Absolutely. And, we're professionals in this industry, and we can't always guarantee that it's a good one. I've had situations where I've dealt with builders on much lower density developments, and they've seemed okay. So you try when you're buying through a regular, high street real estate agent to get a feel for the vendor so that you can help your buyer make a good decision. And vendors can be great all the way to settlement, or they can become nightmares. It's very hard for even us to tell, and we're in the game.
Yeah. So with a longevity, the building's been around long enough, you've got a history, and then you can look to that. But certainly with a brand new building, there's teething issues, and there's always teething issues, right?
Always.
It's just a matter of how the builder and the developer actually, how responsive they are in coming back and dealing with them and making sure that the building there's little things that are sorted out and don't become big things, or was built well, wasn't built well, and they are big things at the outset. But they are the sorts of things that you want to feel in good hands. And
absolutely,
unless a builder has that reputation for standing by their quality, their product, then you've got no real sort of, guide as to what you're in for under those circumstances.
Absolutely. And one of the worst case scenarios, regardless of the builder's intent, is a really significant issue that is so expensive. It causes residents to either have to chip in to deal with a special levy, or the builder has to raise funds and fix the issue, and people might have to vacate. I mean, we've heard all about buildings that people need to vacate. That's worst case scenario, and that's the stuff that reaches the headlines. And I've never heard of anything that's impacted any of my clients or people I know of that nature. But it's not a place that you want to be in.
No, it's also off the back of that, Kate, the risk of the builder or the developer and the developer actually going into liquidation or bankruptcy, and that has been happening, unfortunately, a little bit more post COVID and with the increase in construction costs. So we do. The only time we do off plan really in Brisbane for any of our clients has been downsizers who are going into very large house size apartments, quite prestige. And we know from experience which developers stand behind their product and which developers are too new to put that kind of faith in, or which ones have had so many problems with their buildings that we just would not go near them. And I think as a first home buyer, if that's a pathway that you're going to pursue, it's very important to gather that knowledge and to spend a lot of time investigating the builder and the developer, because they're not always the same person, to understand what is their financial standing, and do they have the funds to actually complete this? If there is a change in construction costs, are they bankrolled enough that they can actually handle that change and see this through to completion? The last thing you want is to potentially lose your deposit because the builder's gone bankrupt.
And on that, contracts for sale for off-the-plan properties they generally favour the vendor. In fact, not generally, probably always favour the vendor.
Yep.
And they're pretty watertight because, let's face it, these owners, these developers, they can afford the big end of town to put their contracts together. Because you was probably using your little conveyancer, a little local solicitor. It's like using David and Goliath. We're not the same outcome. Goliath is still the giant, right?
Yes.
So and this is something that people do need to recognise, that it's like when you try to negotiate the price on an off the plan property. There's no negotiation. They set their prices, and it's like when you go and buy a private treaty established property, assuming you're not going to market, assuming it's not a hot market, you get the opportunity to negotiate. You can work out what market value is for that property. But when you're dealing with off the plan brand new, they set the price. They determine market pricing. And they just put that out there. It's quite interesting. And the buyers are often siloed because buyers don't tend to be looking at existing stock at the same time they look at off the plan. And so they've often got no real benchmarks or comparison to understand really whether that's fair pricing or not.
Yeah.
Because you often find people, particularly first home buyers, is one of the big dangers of first home buyers who are trying to utilise the government grants. Then that basically sends you down the brand new path. You're not even looking at those other properties. So you've really got no idea. And so you're unwittingly overpaying very often.
Oh, it's scary. And, back to the contract conversation, as you said, the big end of town lawyers, a lot of them won't be flexible at all. And we're not talking about a contract that's as thick as your little finger.
No.
I'm talking about a contract that blocks the photocopier.
Thick. Yeah.
Yeah. If I've ever had the misfortune of having to deal with an off-the-plan contract, I've had to load it into the copier and do 2 lots and then weave them together as a PDF. I mean, it's a big, fat contract.
I've seen them bigger than 2 reams of paper.
How horrible.
You need a box to carry it.
It's hard. And so when you ask your suburban conveyancer or solicitor or whoever's doing your review, sometimes buyers will have a lovely, friendly legal rep that does a free review or 2 free reviews. You can bet that they'll charge you for an off the plan. And so they should, because it'll chew up their day.
It's a lot of time. Yeah, it's a lot of time. And it doesn't end quickly. And what I mean by that is when you buy an established property, their job ends within about 30 to 60 days. With an off the plan, the job doesn't end quickly. It could be that there are delays along the way that they need to advise you about. It could be that there's, anything could come up during a very long period between when you get that contract reviewed and when you actually settle that property. So there's a lot of work that goes into those contracts from a conveyance point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we're very nervous about first home buyers just racing in to buy off the plan, thinking that it's an easy solution. And I think that's the temptation. It's hard to buy property, particularly if you're looking in a competitive market. You think, oh God, that's and it's a godsend, and there's free money being dangled by the government. And you think, oh, okay, this is what I need, and I only need a small amount of deposit. I can save up the rest in the settlement period, and it's very compelling. You can certainly see why first home buyers might jump at it. However, we are extraordinarily nervous about you doing it for all of the reasons that we've just talked through. Is there anything else that we should add?
Well, I think it's important to go through what can cause delays. Aside from builders just having, extended periods of construction or delays with their trades, we're also talking about off the plan being, a smaller scale development like townhouses, or like I've talked about, established properties. Imagine you've got an old house on a big block and the owners decided to put 2 units at the back. And if it's on a corner block, they each get their driveways. It's all great. Except the person that buys the front house that's now got no backyard, it's the subdivided house. So its price is attractive because you're getting a house for, the price of a unit without a backyard. But you can sign up to purchase that property, but you can't settle it until the subdivision has gone through for the units. So that's off the plan as well. Yeah. So while you might not be dealing with a builder to fix defects, you might have delays, and delays can be caused by non-building things like services. They could be getting sign-off for the plumbing or for the electricals, or they could have had to put together a strata or an owner's corporation, and that's all got to be signed off. Or the titles office might just be super delayed. Could be Christmas time and they're on skeleton stuff. So you have to allow for that time frame.
Oh, weather delays.
Yes, all of
new
those
fire hydrant. We bought a it was over $2 million property, which was a house, elevated position, and it was a subdivision off another one, but it was next to each other, so they had their own frontage. But the delay was that the council would not approve and finalise the certification until a new fire hydrant was put in. They had to run that fire hydrant from the start of the street to the end of the street. It was about an 80-metre run of fire hydrant that they had to put underground in order to finish that subdivision. It went on for about 2 years before that could be,
Because it's, who's, like you could think, well, whoever's responsible for the fire hydrant, construction, it's not high on their priority list to worry about you moving into your new townhouse.
That's it.
Yeah. And they were fighting that. They were fighting we shouldn't have to do the developer was saying we shouldn't have to do this. That was actually they were trying to show it. Anyway, that's just another thing that can happen. And that's not just a little apartment in a big complex. That was a prestige property on its own land.
Yeah. So we do like to warn you about the risks, and I know that we sound extraordinarily negative about this, but the reality is that these aren't rarities. These are common stories that we hear, so some people can glide through, not a hitch, and they're the most dangerous people, actually, because they're the ones that will encourage all their friends to do the same thing. Because for them it was good, and we're very happy for them, but I think they often don't realise how much luck is involved in actually having a really smooth circumstance when it comes to, buying a type of property that is inherently a lot riskier than buying an established property.
Yeah, so well said. And look, there are a handful of positives to these, and I don't think we should be completely one-sided and gloss over that. Just to recap, you can secure one of these for a small deposit in a lot of cases. You can pick your colours and your designs. It's all fresh and nice and lovely, so that's really fun when you're in a brand new property. They often have lots of value adds to enjoy socially, like swimming pools, barbecue areas, etc. For an investor, you get a lot of depreciation benefits, but remember, you're spending $1 to save 30 cents. And
very good point.
And lastly, it might work for you to put a small amount down. You're not leveraging a lot of money there. And if the area does really well, like exceptionally well, you can make a lot of money on paper without having laid down anything. But that is best case scenario.
Yeah. I will just add one other thing too there. We didn't sort of harp on it too much, and Meighan alluded to it and sort of touched on it when we first started here with her map or her aerial shot behind her in the video, being that scarcity is the enemy of capital growth, right? So, no, it isn't. Scarcity is the friend of capital growth. Scarcity is the friend of capital growth. But the problem is that if you have lots and lots of opportunity to build more of the same type of property, and in a subdivision sense, that is where there's lots of land, another suburb can be created, another subdivision can be created, that is the enemy of capital growth. That
even new apartment complexes really close to you.
Exactly right. And the same deal with apartments. If there's a huge complex, there's lack of scarcity within the complex itself.
Yeah.
But if it's also as part of an enormous master plan, there could be 10 years worth of buildings ahead of you, and you could be buying in the first building. If you're buying in the last building, then you've got the history of all the other buildings. Maybe that will help you. But certainly when you look at master plans in suburb developments, typically the last subdivision has got the smallest land size as well. So you're knocked one way or the other. So it's just being very aware of that. So when you're buying, if you're going to buy off the plan, try to find something that has scarcity. So it's not in a greenfields area where there could be lots and lots of other similar properties built, but where that is in an infill site in a more established area. So there are ways to mitigate your risks in some of those issues.
Yeah, well said.
All right. Well,
we we always have a question.
We do.
Can't let you go without this question, Kate, for our guests, which is, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish that you known when you bought your first home?
I wish I understood land to asset ratio. My first property was an off-the-plan townhouse, and my dad doesn't listen to my podcast, so I can talk about him in a bad way. I had identified a house, an established older 1960s house in a great suburb here in Melbourne, in a suburb called Bentley. And
I love Bentley.
My dad talked me out of it. He's like, no, your back's going to be against the wall. It's too much money for you, blah, blah, blah. And I kept looking and searching, and that house sold to someone else. And I bought a townhouse off the plan for $115,000, which Dad thought was a much better idea for someone my age. And then the builder upturned the whole thing. I had a deposit down on the block on my unit to show my interest. But once it was all the contracts were signed up and it was time to put pen to paper, they didn't have the little 2-bedders anymore. I had to upgrade to a 3-bedder. And it was $155,000. And by then, I'd drunken the Kool-Aid and I was completely excited about my new block. And had I spent $132 in Bentley and bought the house, I would have been significantly in front in a very short space of time. And all is not lost because I was really young. But it just goes to show, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have called my dad for advice. I would have just said, hey, guess what I bought today?
We often say, just be careful about taking advice from Dad, and you've just given a perfect example.
Yeah, I love that because it ties in so well with our topic today. And don't listen to the noise around you. Get yourself educated so that you're making your decisions on your own. You knew what the right thing was there, and you were put a little bit off path. Sorry, Dad, I know you're not listening, but I'm sure you're a great bloke.
You feel my pain.
I do. Quick note, you might think we cover everything you need to know in this podcast, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
That's right. Our first home buyer guide course costs only $990, and you get direct access to Meighan and I to help you with your negotiations even. You can also share a link of any property you're thinking of buying, and we can help you work out whether it's A, B, C, or a no-go zone. We do that every week in a campfire, live every Wednesday lunchtime. Trust me, you will buy better with our guidance, and you'll overpay a hell of a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
Kate, thank you for joining us. Love your wisdom, and we will have you back again soon.
No, it's been a joy. Thank you.
Meighan and I have just created a new Facebook group that you can join, and we're going to have monthly live Q&As, and you can also post your questions and get a little bit more interaction from us and increase your learning and education. It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia. Go along, join, and we'd love to meet you in there.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.